Hello there, my name is Eric Miller. I am a jazz trombonist from the New York area, and in this video I want to talk about the eternal impact of Wayne Shorter, an extremely important person and an amazing human being. And also, first I want to say that when I was in high school, I was in this summer camp called the Skidmore Jazz Summer Camp. That's where I met Jon Batiste, and also Curtis Fuller was the trombone teacher there. And Curtis Fuller, the trombonist, he was in Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, that incredible combo with Wayne Shorter and Freddie Hubbard. And many people, many incredible musicians of all instruments have played with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, different iterations of that band throughout the years. And Art Blakey actually said at one point that if he had to choose, his favorite was the one with Curtis Fuller, Wayne Shorter, and Freddie Hubbard. And they were all very unique and very creative and incredible, prolific composers. And now I want to talk about the grad school program. And the day of the in-person audition for the grad program, the Herbie Hancock Institute, when I walked into the room, I had a bag with mutes in it, because I'm a trombonist, and you have a bag with different types of mutes. And the first thing Wayne said to me is, "Here comes the insurance salesman." He thought that I looked like an insurance salesman with my bag with the mutes. And so that was interesting, that's the first interaction I had with him. It right away lightened the mood, and that helped me somewhat because everybody was feeling nervous because we're in a room with Jimmy Heath, Kenny Burrell, Herbie Hancock, and Wayne all intently watching us play, and that lightened the mood somewhat. And I remember after we played a certain song on the audition in the combo, the next song that we played, Daniel Seif, who is running the program, he said to me, "Okay, Eric, you should count off the tempo of the next song that you guys play." And the next song was going to be Satellite by John Coltrane. And I said in front of everyone, "Well, Mr. Seif, do you think that I should count off the tempo slower or faster than the previous song that we just did?" And Wayne's response to that, I will never forget. He said, "Well, how about counting it off both slower and faster?" So that was interesting, and it caused a bunch of people to laugh. And I remember that because it is true that the song can have moments of slower and faster in jazz. You can have these moments of different tempos, and it all makes sense if everybody's listening to each other and supporting each other. And I got a little bit lost in the ESP song when we played it, and the rhythm section happened to be going in a moment of the absence of time right at that moment, coincidentally. It was almost like we were communicating telepathically, and it ended up working out fine. And that reminds me, there's a story about the song ESP that Wayne wrote where Miles called him on the phone and said, "Okay, now that you're in the band, Wayne, we're going to the studio in 2 days." And when they went into the studio in 2 days, Wayne brought a little sketchbook he had of a bunch of tunes that he wrote, and Miles looked at it for just a couple seconds, and one of the first songs in the book was this song ESP, and they said, "Okay, we're gonna play this." And then that's the version, just one take. That's the version you hear on the album, ESP. So that group, they were doing a lot of in the moment experimentation and not much, if any, rehearsing. So it's really wild to think about, because this is some of the most iconic songs in the jazz repertoire. And it's crazy to think about how fast-paced and wild this story is about just going into the studio in 2 days' notice, bring the book, and there they go. So now, just a couple of weeks before the first class of the first year of the grad program, we got an email where Wayne said in the email to our combo, he said, start to think about how you are going to compose for your combo. And here are 2 compositions of mine. And attached to that email was a full orchestral version of his compositions, Forbidden Planet, and also Flagships, full orchestral versions. And both of those songs were originally from the Phantom Navigator album. And when we heard this, we were all talking to each other like, we're nervous. Everybody in our combo, we're nervous because he's saying in a couple weeks from now, we're going to start to think about how you're going to compose for the combo. And here's 2 songs, and they happen to be these incredible, full orchestral, through composed pieces that were absolutely epic. And the Phantom Navigator album, the songs Forbidden Planet and Flagships are on that album, and it's the Phantom Navigator album is a lot of electronic sounds, and it's interesting how he adapts songs from the electronic albums and then turns them into full orchestral pieces. It's really fascinating. Very different arrangements. And the Phantom Navigator and the High Life album and the Atlantis album are all really amazing albums with a lot of electronic sounds. And the pieces are through composed, meaning it's very different than your typical A-A-B-A form on the typical jazz standards. It's very different than that. It's a through composed story from beginning to end with twists and turns and surprises all along the way. So it's really fascinating music that I love to listen to. You always hear something new in there every time. There is a video on YouTube called Obstacles into Opportunities, where Wayne Shorter is giving deep wisdom, and then there's a short clip of us playing with him footprints at the end of it. And I remember right before we played that, at the event, it was some type of gala event where they said they want for our combo to play with Wayne for 20 minutes. And Wayne said, I say, how about they want us to play for 20 minutes? I say we give them funny minutes, like funny minutes instead of 20 minutes. So that was very interesting. And another thing that Wayne says a lot is it's time for you to be the director, producer, and the leader of the movie of your life. And that means everybody is a leader in a jazz combo. Everybody's the leader. We're all co-leaders. And therefore, it's like there's no such thing as the side man or the side woman. If you want to view it that way, it actually really expands everything in the music in terms of everybody is allowed to express your personality in the music, which is really awesome. And another idea that Wayne talks about, there's no such thing as nothing, no such thing as a mistake or an accident, no such thing as a coincidence, no such thing as failure. All of those things are illusions. So that's some really fascinating stuff. And I would highly suggest to check out the interviews that are on YouTube, interviews of Wayne Shorter. And there's a lot of great content on there. And a lot of why, if I had to say one person that's my greatest hero in life, I would say it's Wayne Shorter. And a lot of it has to do with this wisdom that really informs the music and that informs his personality. Okay, so in 1996, Wayne's wife, Anna Maria, and her niece, Dalila Lucien, were on a plane flight that crashed and exploded. And that's a horrific tragedy. And Wayne was in the middle of a tour in Europe. And of course, he canceled the rest of the performances on the tour as soon as he found out. And then he flew back to the US right away so that he could go to the funeral for his wife and for Dalila. And at the funeral, this is an amazing story. Wayne, at the funeral, publicly said to everyone, now keep in mind, this is the funeral for his wife and for his wife's niece. And at this funeral, Wayne publicly said to everybody, "From this day forward, I am vowing to spread joy everywhere that I go." So from this day forward, I am vowing to spread joy everywhere that I go. And that's really deep because that's exactly what he did. Every time he came in to teach us, it was nothing but joy and nothing but inspiration and encouragement. And he says in an interview in 1996, shortly after this tragedy happened, that death is not the end. Talking about eternity. Eternity is the truth. So that's what he's talking about. And it reminds me of Milton Nascimento in Brazil. The Brazilian singer Milton Nascimento, an incredible singer and songwriter and guitarist who collaborated a lot with Wayne Shorter. And at his heyday, the Brazilian police a bunch of times started threatening his family and started saying, "You're not allowed to visit your family," on and off for years on end. And this had to do with Milton recorded some songs that had lyrics that challenged some of the oppressive nature of the Brazilian government at that time. There were certain policies that were very oppressive of the Brazilian government, and in some of his lyrics, he just challenged it. And just because of that, the government started threatening his family and saying he cannot see his family. And instead of allowing that to affect him negatively, Milton Nascimento instead decided, I am going to continue to perform and spread joy everywhere that I go. And he even had to hum some of the melodies of his lyrics sometimes in performances instead of saying the words. But he did continue to perform regularly throughout all of this craziness. And it's absolutely inspiring. And like I said, he collaborated a lot with Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock and a bunch of other jazz musicians like Michael Brecker, Pat Metheny. And I actually got to see them through this grad program in Turkey. And he was performing with Wayne and Herbie and Esperanza Spalding there. Incredible, moving performance. And at a party there, Milton Nascimento was at the top of a hill, and I just looked at him from the bottom of the hill. It was a big hill. I don't even know where we were, but somewhere in Turkey. And I just see Milton at the top of the hill, and he just looks at me, and Milton Nascimento just goes like this. And he literally held that pose for a long time, staring at me and smiling at me for at least 10 seconds. And I'm not exaggerating. And that had a profound effect on me. And it is something I will never forget. And it ties into this whole thing of spreading joy everywhere that you go. And okay, now talking about the album High Life, that has to do with spiritual elevation, living a life that is spiritually elevated. So it has nothing to do with drugs. It's just talking about spiritual elevation. And I actually transcribed the song High Life for our combo. And as a surprise, I insisted to the guys, we got to play it for him. And it's a difficult song, but we did the best we could and we played it for him. And at the end, Wayne Shorter just looked at us and said, "You're sneaky. You're sneaky." So I won't forget that. And it's that whole album is some of my favorite music. And just about everybody I know would agree. And Wayne arranged several of his compositions for our combo, Prometheus Unbound and Shere Khan the Tiger, arranged for our combo. There's a great version of Prometheus Unbound on Vimeo.com, Vimeo.com, Prometheus Unbound with the NEC Orchestra. And something that I want to talk about is Wayne has written a lot of music for full orchestra. He writes with pen and with whiteout, with immaculate penmanship, and every single part of the orchestra is written out by him. Now, it's fully composed, fully arranged, and fully orchestrated by him. And there's a lot of music out there that he's written that people have not heard much of yet. There's a clarinet concerto that's amazing. There's a link on YouTube from Vienne 2003, full orchestral version of Vendendiendo Allegria, which is an expansion of the Allegria album, an amazing chamber orchestral album. And also, you can hear some of his orchestral version of Over Shadow Hill Way, 21 minutes and 30 seconds into a video on YouTube called Live in Paris from France 2004, Over Shadow Hill Way. And there's YouTube Monterey Jazz Festival 2000, the year 2000. 30 minutes in, you can hear 3 different full orchestral pieces written by him. And of course, there's the great recent album, Emanon, which means no name when you say it backwards. And on that album, Emanon, there's a bunch of great orchestral writing. Really inspiring. And Umbria 2017, there's unique versions of the Three Marias and of Pegasus, very different than the versions on the album Emanon. So it's fascinating to me how he records the album Emanon, and then just a couple years later, he's doing the Three Marias and Pegasus, very different versions with very different endings. And all of these parts written out by hand for each individual member of the orchestra. That's a ton of work. And if you're a musician, you really know it's a ton of work when you're writing orchestral music out by hand, each part for the orchestra with great penmanship also. And of course, Wayne loves the sci-fi movies and books. In the classes, he would show us some of these, and he would act out the different characters from these sci-fi movies and books with a lot of enthusiasm. Literally acting out different characters. And it's very clear how these characters and stories influenced his compositional process. Another story I could share is at the International Jazz Day we went to at Osaka, Japan. They were doing their concert on the stage, and there were a lot of great musicians there, tons of great musicians there. And there was a green room, which you left from the backstage area, you walk down a path, and then it's a separate building, is a small separate building, is this green room. And in the middle of the whole presentation with all these different incredible musicians, I walked from the backstage area down the path to that separate building, a small building, and I walked in the building, and I had no idea, but I ended up walking into Wayne Shorter warming up on the soprano sax, and it was just me and him in the room. And he looked at me and he immediately started saying, "Hey, Eric, you know, I have an interesting thought. You know how we're in Japan right now, and there's so many great Japanese musicians. Well, maybe my thought is perhaps you might be able to meet a Japanese woman here or a Japanese girl here, and maybe if it goes pretty well, it could lead to marriage. Perhaps you could meet someone here, and perhaps it could lead to marriage, because another thing is, people in Japan oftentimes are not about that Hollywood thing." So that's what Wayne said to me personally, and that was very interesting. So that's not something typical you hear from a jazz teacher, and I understand what Wayne was getting at when he was saying, oftentimes someone from Japan is not about that Hollywood thing. That Hollywood thing is referring to, if someone is looking for someone who's doing really successful and really famous, but the people from other countries sometimes more humble and encouraging and supportive. And that's really fascinating that Wayne felt the desire to say all of that to me personally. So I'll never forget that, of course. And also, Wayne's wife, Ana Maria, was from Brazil. And then his second wife, also from Brazil. So it's really beautiful. So fascinating stuff. And then another thing is, my group in the grad school was called Holophonor, which is a reference to Futurama. HOLOPHONOR is how you spell it. And Wayne Shorter produced an album that we recorded called Light Magnet. And Wayne Shorter was sitting there in the studio giving us all kinds of insightful advice, commentary on everyone's pieces. The album is called Light Magnet. And one other story is a few years later, after the grad program, I got to see him at a rehearsal with Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. And when I saw him there, the first thing that happened when I walked into the room at Jazz at Lincoln Center was I walked to the door, and at the door was Wayne Shorter. And the first thing that Wayne said to me was, "Hey, Eric, oh, it's good to see you. What are you doing here?" So I thought that was hilarious. Like, what am I doing here? I'm obviously here to see you rehearse with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. I'm very lucky that when I was in Juilliard, the second year of it, Elliot Mason, the trombonist, incredible trombonist, very creative person, he was my private instructor the second year of the Juilliard Artist Diploma program. And coincidentally, around that time was when Wayne Shorter did an excellent concert with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, where all of the different members arranged pieces that Wayne composed over the years, spanning a wide range of time and styles. So, and I remember in the rehearsal, Wayne never had any criticism whatsoever of anyone's arrangements. The only stuff Wayne said was supportive types of stuff. And there was never even one criticism of anyone or anyone's arranging. And that was really interesting to observe, that it was all positivity coming from Wayne in that environment, collaborating with the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. Very interesting. And in the beginning of the video presentation of that concert, it's like zoomed out in outer space, and you see like a little planet Earth, and then there Wayne Shorter says, on that little blue dot, two people are fighting over a parking space. And it's like a joke because it's interesting, on this planet that goes by so fast, people get so worked up about stuff that happens, and meanwhile we're like one grain of sand on the beach, and the beach is the universe or the multiverse, and we're just one little grain of sand or one little blue dot. So it's interesting when you keep that perspective, keep the eternity perspective through life. So that's something Wayne in the interviews always talking about. So that's basically the stuff I wanted to talk about. Holofanor, that combo in the grad program I was in, is a great group of people. They are primarily in Los Angeles. Miro Sprague on piano, Josh Johnson alto saxophone, Mike Catone on the trumpet, Jonathan Pinson on the drums, Dave Robert on the bass, and Diego Urbano on the vibraphone in Chile. And thank you all for listening. Have a good one. Take care. Feel free to be in touch.